Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com. And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 114, Escape with Sherlock Holmes.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
And it is that time once again for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I am Scott Monty.
And I am Burt Wolder.
Thank goodness for that. I don't know what we would have done if you had reported here as someone else.
That's true. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't reported here.
We've never had a guest host on the show.
Well, that's true.
Well, maybe there's an opportunity there.
Yeah.
That's something to consider. And maybe, if you're listening now, well, if you're not listening, you won't hear this, so don't worry about it. But if you're listening and you can think of somebody that might make a good co-host, maybe there's a time when Bert is going to be out of town, or when I will be otherwise entertained by hockey tournaments and whatnot. Should we have a guest host? Who should that be? And more importantly, what's the model that we should use for getting that guest host on here? And what I mean by that is we have another show that I'm going to talk about momentarily. But Patreon, as you well know, has been one of the ways that we have tried to support the show. It costs money to pay for hosting services and bandwidth and advertising and web design and all the rest for music clips and other things we have to license, for sending out prizes for listeners and, well, when we used to do the quiz. So Patreon helps us to run the show. And we enacted another reward level on Patreon on our other show. We said, if you fund us at this level, we'll invite you on as a guest host. So maybe that's a way, kind of like the, I remember days past in Boston. If you donated a certain amount to the symphony, they would let you conduct the Stars and Stripes Forever with the Boston Pops, which really meant nothing because the orchestra kind of conducted itself anyway. They were on autopilot with that one, but the point is that it was a reward level, not unlike the NPR mug, tote bag, or umbrella.
Well, I think that's a good idea. The nice thing about conducting the Stars and Stripes is it's one of those things that the orchestra knows so well that, in truth, obviously, if there was nobody standing at the podium, they would still get through the Stars and Stripes Forever. But the other thing is there may be, among our listeners, people who are terrified about the idea of actually having to talk to a large number of people and be recorded about Sherlock Holmes. And so therefore we need to be flexible. If you give us enough on Patreon, we will not approach you to be a host of the show.
Maybe we won't bug you about Patreon anymore either.
Yeah.
Right. Buy the show out for the year.
Yeah. It's a good suggestion, though. I mean, I can think of a couple of people who, just off the top of my head, who would do a great job chatting about Sherlock Holmes instead of us. In fact, why don't we get 2 guest hosts? And then
we don't have to show up at all.
Yeah, in fact, what are you doing later? Why don't we just stop this now and I'll buy you a drink?
Perfect. See you later, everybody.
Okay, goodbye.
Tempting as it is. I will not, I'll just sit here and drink alone. Well, the point is, get on over to ihearofsherlock.com. Check out that Become a Patron button or the Support Us section. You can also hit it up at patreon.com/ihearofsherlock. And if you're not into the Patreon thing, we recently had a fan, well, I won't name him because we haven't gotten his permission to name him on the show. But, someone said, I don't want to do the Patreon thing. Can I support you guys another way? Well, sure. PayPal has a donation option. We put a big old donate button right there on our homepage. So that's an option too. So.
Yes. Well, and to our patron who you know who you are. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for helping us continue this sordid work.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Well, let's talk about a sponsorship of a different sort.
The people of the ancient Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of Wessex have not forgotten Sweyn Forkbeard, the Danish king who invaded our country just 1,022 years ago. We are prepared for a global war against the evil, herring-eating Danes. As we top our battlements with cauldrons of boiling oil, you can turn to a relaxing book from our Wessex Press, such as the Watson Chronicles by Anne Margaret Lewis. The award-winning author of Murder in the Vatican chronicles the lives of Dr. Watson, Sherlock Holmes, and Mycroft in a new series of baffling mysteries, including the biggest of all, Watson's Wives. Order its satisfying 294 pages right now at our WessexPress.com. February sulks its shadow over moorland, marsh, and meadow. Rain that pours for hours and hours, putting paid to plants and flowers. What better time to reach for the pleasure only a volume from the Wessex Press can provide? Choose yours today.
Well, it's always nice to escape with our fine folks at Wessex Press. But we want to talk about escapism of a different sort. But before we do, we promised in the intro to the show there to talk about our other show called Trifles. You familiar with Trifles, Bert?
Yes, I've had one. You know, I love those layers where you have sort of sponge down at the bottom and then strawberries and whipped cream and things. And I wonder how they put those things together.
I think your trifle was soaked a little too much in brandy. Do you use brandy in trifles?
It seems like a waste of really good brandy.
Maybe brandied peaches. I don't know. Well, Trifles, of course, is our other show. It's a weekly 15-minute long show that is about, well, it's the two of us doing what we're doing here today, but on a shorter basis, discussing some of the elements of the Sherlock Holmes stories. They're designed to be topical in nature around, maybe holidays or tying the time of the year to a case that was supposed to have taken place during that part of the year. But one by one, we're working our way, not necessarily through all the stories, but through these different topics that we pick in Trifles. And so far, we've talked about things like optimism, and the positive side of things in the canon. And we've talked about Watson coming to London for the first time, off of his troop ship after being injured in the Afghanistan war. What else have we talked about on Trifles? It's been that long, has it? All right, let me help you. We took a stroll through Simpsons and talked about what dining there must have been like, both in Sherlock Holmes's time and from our own experience dining there as one of the bastions of Victorian dining. And we also talked about Charles Augustus Milverton, moral relativism there. We talked about Watson and Holmes taking the law into their own hands and Charles Augustus Milverton. So lots of interesting topics afoot there, a wide variety of things. So get on over there to SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Sign up for email updates there, subscribe to us on iTunes, and let us know what you think. Let us know what you think. We've gotten some positive feedback so far, and I would hope that continues as we continue to develop the show.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the promised title here, Escape with Sherlock Holmes. What do we mean by escaping with Sherlock Holmes, Bert?
Well, that is a great way to start because escapism is one of these terms that generally implies an absence, a detachment, a separation from everyday reality or routine, shirking responsibilities, taking a break, things like that.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. I like that too. In fact, goodbye.
There we go again. Well, given everything that's going on in the world these days, if you follow the news, first of all, God bless you. But we're barraged with so much, and it's not just politics. I read a recent study that said that despite us being awash in so much information, we are more at risk of being less trusting of what's going on around us. The more we see, the more we find, the less trusting we are. And that's no way to go through life. And, we've often talked about, the feeling that we get by delving into these stories and being able to escape for an hour or two, by reading these wonderful stories from a century or more ago.
Well, now here's a question. What, in your mind, is the difference between escapism, or is there any connection? Maybe that's a better question. Is there any connection in your mind between escapism and procrastination?
Oh, that's a really good point. And I think there is a distinction between the two. Procrastination is one of those things that I think creeps up on you. And it's not necessarily done deliberately. It's maybe done in more of an absent-minded way. Shirking responsibility, yeah, you do need to make some conscious effort at that, but usually it's, whiling away your time, wasting time doing something else, right? And I think escapism implies intent, implies a concentrated effort at removing oneself from reality and applying oneself in another fashion or to another topic at hand. What do you think?
Well, I'm interested in your interpretation. That sounds good. I think it's just interesting. It just occurred to me because, procrastination is delay. I mean, you've got a deadline coming up and there are many more, one of the continuing challenges of performance management when you analyze roles and responsibilities and why people are able to execute job functions in one particular environment but not another. You find out there are a lot of factors that influence all of this. And one of them is immediate rewards. And so if you have a pastime that you particularly enjoy, like going to the gym or going for a walk or taking your dog out or stamp collecting or watching television, particularly if it's easy and accessible and nearby, and particularly if you can get to it over the internet, it's very tempting to find yourself consciously or unconsciously delaying a project, a task, something that's less rewarding, something that perhaps isn't immediately gratifying, in favor of watching TV and looking at the stamps and taking another look at the newspaper and checking Facebook and so on and so forth. So I mean, I am no expert in any of this, but it seems to me that there are related areas. So I find that interesting.
That's interesting. And, just while you were talking, I took the opportunity to look up both words and look at their origins. And the word escape originated around 1250 to 1300. And it's derived from, Middle English, and Old North French and Late Latin. And it's, let's see, the Vulgar Latin, excapare, is a verbal derivative of the Late Latin cappa, C-A-P-P-A, meaning hooded cloak. Okay? Now, procrastinate originated in the late 1500s from the Latin procrastinatus, which literally means to put off until tomorrow. Crastinare is a derivative of crastinus, which is tomorrow. So you've got this notion of putting off until tomorrow for procrastinate, and escape almost literally meaning hiding oneself, hooding oneself, cloaking oneself from something, from a pursuer, from reality, from the tasks at hand.
Oh, well, now I like that. Boy, that's fascinating. I had no idea that the word escape had its root in hiding yourself or concealing yourself. Because when we were first talking about this topic, that's one of the things that occurred to me. For example, you could ask yourself who in the canon could be said to be escaping or indulging in escapism. And I thought, oddly enough, immediately of Irene Adler, who was escaping from the unwanted attentions of the king's agents in their efforts to obtain that incriminating photograph. I thought of Hosmer Angel, who sort of escaped at the last minute in case of identity at the church door. I thought of the obvious. I thought of Selden, the Notting Hill murderer, who certainly escaped. I thought of Hugh Boone.
Of course.
Who was a great escape for Neville St. Clair. And I thought of Brunton the butler, who was this, he was a linguist and he was a music teacher and he had other capabilities, and he escaped from the oppressing routine of being a butler in his other intellectual pursuits. And the last one I thought of was J. Neil Gibson, who was at least more than 100 years ahead of his time because he escaped from the U.S. Senate.
I like that. That's a good one. And, he, in some ways, used his money to escape from the law, from scrutiny. Not that, there was anything illegal, but, that was the one thing that, was her name Alice? It wasn't Alice. Why can't I think of her name?
Oh, right.
Goodness gracious.
Grace Dunbar?
Grace Dunbar, yes. Yeah. That why she was convincing him to put his money to work for good instead of evil. So, well, that's an interesting interpretation of escape and escapism. And I like that a lot. We could even continue to add to that. Elsie Cubitt, escaping her life in Chicago and her family's sordid past. The same thing with Professor Coram in The Golden Pince-Nez, escaping his past in the Russian Revolution. Lots of different examples like that. It seems like there's always someone running from something in the Sherlock Holmes stories.
Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah.
Well, otherwise there'd be no reason for pursuit, right? Well, let's take this, let's twist this a little bit, and take escapism, more along the lines of, detachment from reality, and look into, well, for lack of a better description, hobbies of folks in the canon, things that maybe some individuals use to escape from the dull routine of existence, as Sherlock Holmes said. And I'm not talking about cocaine or morphine. Let's take Holmes himself. He had a few things that he was interested in along the way. We learn also in The Golden Pince-Nez that he was into deciphering palimpsests. You ever heard of a palimpsest before you read the canon?
Yes, yeah, I had heard, but it's a wonderful word to encounter. And Holmes also was a beekeeper.
That is true.
in later years. So there you are.
Well, for our listeners who don't know what a palimpsest is, should we translate?
Yeah, well, if you've got, a limp palm, which is, you just discussed the root of escapism and procrastination. Obviously, the word palimpsest comes from limp palm. You can you can distill and process, the after effects and secretions of limp palms into a flat document that is surprisingly durable through the ages, and you can write on it. Everyone knows that.
Oh, I got nothing for that. Nothing. I was going to go the route of lemon zest, but I didn't even want to. Oh, I couldn't compare to that.
Oh, I like that a lot. Well, palimpsest is it's a lambskin, isn't it? It's a animal skin?
Well, no, it's parchment. And if we really want to get to the roots here, it's from the Latin palimpsestus, which is from the Greek palimpsestos, meaning rubbed again. It is a paper. Essentially, it's a document that has been written on, erased, and written on again. And what someone who is trying to decipher a palimpsest does is they're trying to determine what that original writing was. So in other words, it's been scraped off, literally and figuratively, and they're trying to go back. It's almost like, trying to investigate a painting, when there are layers of paint, underneath, looking at what the original sketch or the original version of the painting was. Mm. So that's what Holmes is trying to do in, the opening of, the Golden Pasne. It's a dark and stormy night, right? It's a rainy night. And so he's got this hobby out. Similarly, in the Bruce Partington plans, that story that opened in November of 1895 with 3 or 4 days of thick yellow fog. That's one of those wonderful openings, in the canon. In that one, Holmes was, studying music of the Middle Ages. Specifically the polyphonic motets of Lassus. I don't know if you've ever listened to Orlando de Lassi, but it's not necessarily the most uplifting music to be playing during a fog in or a rain in. Modum desiderat, quem ad modum desiderat, cervus ad fontes aquarum desiderat, cervus ad fontes aquarum.
Oh, I love that music. I do. I really do. I love all those middle age choral music, Hildegard von Bingen and Lassus and all the rest of them.
Well, evidently Holmes did too. Well, in addition to that, let's see, what else did Holmes? He came back from the hiatus. You talk about an escape. The Great Hiatus. And you know what a hiatus is. What you say when you meet an atus. Holmes literally escaped the clutches of Moriarty at the Reichenbach Falls and then went on this 2.5-3 year junket and came back and told Watson what he had been up to, visiting the Khalifa at Khartoum and the head lama in the Himalayas there. But of course, on his way back, he stopped through Montpellier and was researching some coal tar derivatives. So I don't know why you would be doing high chemistry on your vacation, but evidently that was one of the things that Holmes enjoyed.
Mm. Well, those sorts of studies are can be very transporting to someone who's very interested in the science and in the discovery. Mm. But I think of two of our guests. I think of Maria Konnikova, who would obviously, clearly have something to say from the standpoint of the history of psychology and the topic of escapism and escaping from reality. And yes, Bonnie McBird, because yes, I was thinking of Bonnie McBird because one of the things that we touched on in her in the academic side of her interests is the psychology of the flow experience. You know, the idea that, for example, well, just about anybody, when you get deeply engaged in a hobby, you become, or an activity, it's not a hobby, when you, in something you're very good at that's deeply satisfying to you, you lose all track of time. You look up and you see suddenly, oh my goodness, it's 5 o'clock. Where did the day go? And, it's that flow experience that's been the work of, a fellow whose name I always mispronounce, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, whom she, I recall, had taught about, in some of her, academic work.
Yeah.
And I've always been fascinated by that flow experience. Do you have it when you work on certain things?
I do, but you know what's interesting, and we've talked about this on previous shows, is that I also have ADD, right? So what's been found with a lot of people who do have ADD is not only do they have the inability to concentrate on things or to focus on things at certain times, but they also have this innate ability to hyper-focus and to do exactly what you just described, to get in that flow and just be completely absorbed by something that captures the mind. So I think it's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And, I love those moments, you know, when I'm deeply involved in things. It's really a great joy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we must have other examples of folks who, have used hobbies or pastimes to escape from the realities of existence in the canon. Any that come to mind for you?
Well, yes, our old pal Josiah Amberley.
Oh. He liked painting, right?
Chess. Yes. Yeah, he used to paint chess people. Chessmen, yeah. Paint them blue, paint them red.
Yeah, and didn't Holmes say something about chess and the mind of a criminal, in that one?
Oh, maybe.
I don't know if I'm recalling it correctly, but, it seemed that, in certain movies or whatnot, he also, mentioned, Moriarty with regard to chess. I don't believe it's in the canon. But in this case, he said, Amberley excelled at chess. 1 mark, Watson, of a scheming mind. Interesting. So he enjoyed chess. And of course, speaking of scheming minds, we've got old Stapleton in The Hound of the Baskervilles, who was, in his first meeting with Watson, he was out running around on the moors with his butterfly net. And he was a butterfly collector.
A hobby that has attracted many people, including Vladimir Nabokov.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. A cork, a pin, and a card. And I will soon add him to my collection, Watson.
And then there was the evil Baron Gruner from The Illustrious Client, who was an expert and collector in Chinese pottery. And in that tale, in that case, we saw what Watson had to go through to get himself to the point where he had the prospect of holding even a short, intelligent conversation with such a knowledgeable collector.
Yeah, how realistic do you think that actually was? That Watson could cram, the night before an exam, right? Go to the library, take out all these books, absorb yourself in it, and then go have a conversation with somebody. But if you were Watson in that case, and hey, let's face it, Watson did his share of studying at medical school, so he's no stranger to poring over the books. But if you were in Watson's shoes and you had to walk into the lair of Baron Gruner, what would be going through your mind with this kind of preparation?
Well, it depends on your conception of Watson. My conception of Watson is that every word he tells us is exactly true. And so clearly, although it was a huge challenge, he pulled it off to the degree that he reports that he pulled it off. But on the other hand, if your conception of Watson is more like Nigel Bruce, then what probably happened was he came into the room and said, Chica.
I thought it was tea time, old boy.
Watson, what? Oh.
Wow. Well, if Jerry Kegley is listening right now, he's going to kill us. Watson defender that he is. Nigel Bruce defender that he is, I should say.
Yes.
Well, no, I think that's an excellent distinction. And, in one sense, Watson has to walk in there with the best poker face that he can muster, going up against pretty much one of the foremost experts in the world of Chinese pottery. And, I love the exchange when, and I don't know how in his preparation this could have been overlooked. He said, I was aware, he says, this is Watson talking to Baron Gruner. I was aware that you had written a book on the subject. And Gruner very naturally asks, have you read the book? And Watson says, no. I mean, even if you hadn't, well, why wouldn't you say yes at that point? You're trying to bluff your way through it. And, Gruner says, dear me, this becomes more and more difficult for me to understand. You're a connoisseur and a collector with a very valuable piece in your collection. And yet you've never troubled to consult the one book which would have told you of the real meaning and value of what you had? How do you explain that? And Watson, of course, says, I'm a very busy man. I'm a doctor in practice. And this is, to hobbyists and collectors everywhere, this is the ultimate line. That is no answer. If a man has a hobby, he follows it up, whatever his other pursuits may be. Right? No excuses, son.
Gee, one would almost think that an author has put poor Watson in a bad position.
No.
On purpose.
For shame. For shame.
Yeah, well, Watson should have given, the really honest and direct answer, which is, I don't have time for reading notebooks.
Yes, I love it. I brought a copy. Will you sign it for me?
That's right.
That's how you could have bluffed him. I'm really, that's a huge plot hole right there, is that Watson didn't take that book out of the library when he knew that's who he was going to see. But, and other hobbies, other villainous, it seems like the villains all had the hobbies. None of the protagonists other than Holmes had a hobby. Both Vincent Spaulding and Jeffro Rucastle used this hobby as a ruse, as a red herring. Do you know what that was?
Oh, yes, photography. One of my lifetime hobbies.
Is it?
Oh, yeah. Since I was a little tyke. Yeah.
Well, gone are the days when you had to ferret yourself away in a dark room, right? Which is what they were both using as an excuse for what's going on down there, or what's going on up in that turret. It's photography. It's a dark room. It's a black box, literally and figuratively.
Well, I loved it. I really did love it. I missed the chemistry, but oddly enough, with today's digital tools, people have gone to great lengths to allow you to apply the same techniques digitally, including bringing over the vernacular, of dodging and so on and words like that. But, something just occurred to me. The literary agent Conan Doyle had a great many hobbies, one of which was photography. In fact, if you search around on the steam-driven internet, you can find articles that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote for the British Journal of Photography, I think all in the days before Holmes became a thing in the 1880s. Because I've read some of them. I found them online and read some of them. And in those days, of course, as you say, in addition to the darkroom work, you'd need to be traveling around with, at least 50 pounds of oak and glass and cases and things to protect the materials on which you were going to expose your images. And it was a huge amount of stuff to carry around.
Yeah. It's a commitment. You have to be all in with that kind of thing.
And Conan Doyle was a skier. He innovated. He has credit in many quarters for being the first to promote skiing as a hobby. He was a bicyclist. He was a big enthusiast about things like that.
He was a motorist.
Yep. Got the first traffic ticket, I think, in England, or one of the first.
Flipped his car over on himself, too. One time. Well, that's all very interesting. And one last one. And I really have to credit Peter Carey for being ahead of his time. You know how Peter Carey used to go out behind his house, and he had this little cabin. It was a recreation of a seagoing vessel. He would go out there, he would drink his rum, and ultimately that's where the harpoon that was on the wall helped him meet his ultimate end. But Peter Carey was actually well ahead of the trend of tiny houses. Right? Tiny houses are all the thing. Or I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal last week that there are certain tiny houses that are specifically built or requested by women, kind of their refuge from the hustle bustle of what's going on in the house, the man cave and the kids and all the rest. And I swear to God, they're actually calling them this. They're calling them she sheds.
What?
She sheds.
By the seashore, no doubt. But so what? These are little hobby huts.
It's just
for
a one room, like the tiny house thing, the equivalent of a man cave. It's called a she shed.
And what's in it?
That's what she shed. Whatever they want, a couch, a desk, it's a chance to just have your own space. And escape from what's going on in the rest of the house. But Home Depot and Lowe's, they sell plans for these little cottages, tiny houses, she sheds.
Yeah, amazing. I think that it's interesting. This has got to be a very human characteristic and in fact, in a way, it's sort of almost animalistic. Animals. For example, if you're a dog lover, that the dogs like to be safe and secure in spaces under certain conditions. But this has got to be part of really the human constitution, because if you think about it, our interest of Sherlock Holmes had its root in terms of the society back with our old friend Christopher Morley, who, as a child with his brothers, used to form clubs and call themselves, I think, the Five Orange Pips back in those days. But, it's this forming of clubs and the idea of having club houses. And Morley, in later years at his home in Long Island, built a little writing cabin for himself outside the main house.
That's
where he
true.
could just have his books in his desk. And, of course, that gets us to that great clubhouse builder, that spirit of innovation when it comes to these small societies. Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes, who with his pirate hat and wooden sword would stand up in his treehouse, scheming about dropping water balloons on poor old Susie Durkins.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, of course, Edgar Smith, he had his own little man cave, little shack outside of his home too. That's where the light switch panel was found.
Right, and that was in Morristown, New Jersey. And
yes.
Years ago, I was up that driveway. Edgar had enough influence or cunning or persistence with the town. I think it was in Morristown, to get that driveway, that path, that private drive named Baker Street. So he could, he had a little sign up that said Baker Street, and you could actually send him mail at 221B Baker Street in Morristown, New Jersey in those days.
I love that. Well, it's been a pleasure escaping with you.
I certainly hope the warden doesn't find out.
We all have something to escape from, but what is it that you escape to? Since you're listening to this podcast, we're going to guess that Sherlock Holmes stories would be an educated guess. But even the most rabid Sherlockian needs to escape from those from time to time. But where to turn? Well, since 1946, Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts have been turning to the Baker Street Journal, where they turn back its yellow covers to discover the output of the inner workings of minds, just like theirs. And while we escape from the familiar passages of the Canon when we enter the pages of the BSJ, we're treated to an alternative universe of theories, suppositions, and conclusions. In the Baker Street Journal, you can explore the town of Moriarty, New Mexico, or investigate the self-censorship of Dr. Watson, or learn how an annotated volume comes about, all while escaping from the drudgeries of work, the wretched children screaming for their supper, or that delightful and charming mother-in-law who's come to live with you. Yes, we all need to escape every now and then, and your retreat should match your sensibilities. So retreat to the pages of BakerStreetJournal.com and renew your subscription to Sanity today. And that can mean only one thing. It's time for the news. Oh, we have lots to cover this time around, Bert.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to start us off?
There's been a new book that had a very intriguing title and an interesting variety of reviews. This is really focused on detecting the origin of Sherlock Holmes, and it's by an author whom I don't know, named Michael Sims, and it's called Arthur and Sherlock. And its focus is how Conan Doyle came to, in quotes, invent his famous detective.
Yeah,
and there was a very nice review by one of our former guests, Graham Moore, who did the he wrote the book
he wrote the Sherlockian,
right?
Which you remember from episode 30.
Yes, I do remember. And, but he was a very interesting guest and a fascinating, creative guy.
And he won the Oscar, right? For, what did he win the Oscar for now? A screenplay.
Yeah.
What did he win the Oscar for? Was it, The Imitation Game? That's what it was for.
Oh, right. Right. Yeah. Long after we talked to him.
Right.
Yeah, that was a pretty good script. I liked that film with Benedict Cumberbatch as Alan Turing.
Yes,
and Graham Moore gave it, a pretty positive review in the New York Times. But there was a sort of an equally disappointed review in the Washington Post. I guess it was not written by Michael Dirda, but written by another reviewer.
Yes, yeah, and I think the conclusion there was that they wished he had kept going with the timeline. We got up to the creation part, but it wasn't really extended too much past that, if I recall the review correctly. But one thing I've been hearing from a number of people online, as they've been questioning this, the book's been getting a lot of publicity, is the original name for Sherlock Holmes. Now, of course, we know Ormond Sacker for Dr. Watson, and what was it? Sherrinford Holmes. Mm-hmm. As we saw that one sheeter from the manuscript or the notes from A Study in Scarlet. But evidently there's been another notebook where Conan Doyle had been taking preliminary notes about the case, and the name Sherrington Hope came up as the original name for Sherlock Holmes. So we had Sherrington Hope, we had Sherlock Holmes, and then Sherlock Holmes. And of course, Jefferson Hope as one of the other characters in A Study in Scarlet. Where's this notebook been all these years? I don't know. It may be one that, because they mentioned it was also referred to in A Teller of Tales by Dan Stasauer. So it may be the one that Costa Rozakis owns that came up for auction in 2004. So that could be part of it. So we'll see. But fascinating, that we continue to have these origin stories, these biographies about Conan Doyle, and it seems like there's always something slightly new to uncover. Well, then our friend Alistair Duncan, over on his blog, Doyleakian, wonders whether the Victorian Sherlock Holmes has been done to death. Right? And he says that because there are people who are responding to these modern versions, Elementary and, of course, Sherlock, saying, well, of course we need to have modern Sherlock Holmes. The Victorian versions have been done to death. And he kind of took a counterpoint. He says, really, it hasn't. There have really been very few examples of true, in the era, Sherlock Holmes films or shows. Because right through the mid-40s, every Sherlock Holmes film, aside from The Hound of the Baskervilles and The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes with Rathbone, every Sherlock Holmes film was shot as a contemporary movie. It wasn't set in Victorian times. So, we get up to the 1950s, and on television, of course, you have the Marion Crawford and Ronald Howard versions that are squarely set in Victorian England. You've got the Hammer Hound. You've got Terror by Night. And, of course, Private Life, and ultimately up through the mid-'80s with Jeremy Brett. That's really the extent of Victorian Sherlock Holmeses that we have. So he's basically saying, bring it. We could always use more.
Well, I think so. It's interesting in a way to look back at the progression of these things and think about at what point a recent generation becomes interesting enough so that its visual representation is going to be delightful to contemporary theater goers. Yeah. And the fascinating part of it is since the invention of motion pictures and the popularization of motion pictures in the early, in the 19-teens, all the way up until 1938 or 39, the Rathbone Hound, Holmes had been contemporary. So here is a character who, since his first appearance in the latter part of the 19th century, all the way up to the 1930s, was always contemporary. I mean, that's just an amazing swath. And then the great 20th Century Fox pictures that have Rathbone and Bruce in, this magnificent 20th century backlot Victorian English setting. So I think the basic point that Holmes in Victorian England has not been overdone, is well made. But the other interesting thing is, how fascinating it's been that in the last, years, we've seen shows that have been based in the 1980s and then in the 1970s. And of course, Mad Men, things from the 1950s. But it seems that, our attention span is getting narrower and narrower in the sense that, you can go back 10 or 15 years and sort of recreate an ambiance and, people can find that entertaining. I have the sense that our span of interest there is getting shorter and shorter. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think partially you're right, but I also think it's also human nature to yearn for that which is nostalgic. This is exactly what Edgar Smith said in his essay, that half-remembered, half-forgot time of snug Victorian illusion. What was it? I don't know if I'm getting it exactly right, but the point is that even the Baker Street irregulars, living, 30 years past the time of Holmes's creation or popularity, still yearning for those days of 1895.
Well, it's more understandable, I think. I mean, again, I could be wrong, but I think it's more understandable for somebody like, Morley and Smith. I mean, if you think about it, Christopher Morley died in 1957, and what had he lived through? Oh, 2 world wars and the atomic bomb.
Nah. Been there, done that.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of change that somebody born in 1890 who died in the late 1950s or early 1960s went through is not really being experienced, I don't think, by the later generations. Thank goodness.
Oh, come on! I've lived through the iPhone.
Hey, I lived through bell-bottom jeans. Yeah.
I didn't get cable till I was 12.
Those were tough days.
Oh, boy. Well, speaking of tough days, if you've had a tough day and you're in the city of New York, the New York Times recommends a mysterious bookshop in Tribeca, the hunt for clues and diversions. And that is not just a mysterious bookshop. Why, it is the mysterious bookshop. The Times had a piece here on Otto Penzler's bookstore, noting that it is New York's oldest independent purveyor of spy thrillers and whodunits.
Yes, and there it is. I loved that piece. It was in the Metropolitan section of the Sunday paper last week. It was a very loving and kind review of the Mysterious Bookshop, quoting Otto, although I'm chagrined to read his comment that he's becoming more aware of his mortality. Everyone knows that great bookshop owners live forever, so this he needs to refocus his attention elsewhere.
Well, he did say in that one that it was unprofitable to the tune of 6 figures for quite a while. And he talked about us with that with us on the show, both on I think it was episode 17 and again on 87, if I'm not mistaken. So good conversations with Otto. Well, then, of course, we move over to Variety, and there we see a story about a Finnish-American television show called Sherlock North. Evidently, it is based on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's characters, and it is authorized by the Conan Doyle estate. Oh, boy. Well, the point here is that, as we all know, when Holmes came back from the Great Hiatus, which we mentioned earlier in the show, he told Watson of the explorations of a Norwegian named Sigerson, this false identity. Well, that's the premise for the show. Under this false identity, Holmes settles in dark and cold Lapland in northern Finland, sparking a culture clash between the upper-class, fast-talking, and eccentric Brit and the down-to-earth Nordic characters. So stay on the lookout for that if you happen to be in Finland. We'll see whether it gets distribution wider than the Scandinavian countries. Crazy.
Indeed.
What else?
Well, there was a terrific store where I see it's. I know it's on this website here. There's a fascinating story on a website called Unbound.com. It's a blog posting from February 5th, and it's all about an interview with someone who was lucky enough to be an extra in the Scottish outdoor scenes that were being filmed in the private life of Sherlock Holmes. In the last part of that picture when they go to that castle in Scotland, and it's wonderful reminiscences of someone who actually participated in the production, accompanied by some very nice photographs.
It is. We learned a few things there. We learned that Christopher Lee was very generous with his time and answered lots of questions, particularly of the youngsters that were there on the set. And we also learned that Queen Victoria in that scene, the actress who played her, flubbed her lines about 4 or 5 times, and they had to load her back in the coach, turn it around, race her back up the hill, and then reshoot the thing all over again. So
it's also very nicely written. This blog post starts this way. The author writes, "A coach clatters towards the ruins of a castle in the near dusk, pulled by 4 white horses. A couple of liveried men, a coachman and a footman, are at the front, and another stands behind. 2 more liveried men trot in their wake on another pair of white horses, and above the clop of hooves and rattle of wheels, we just about recognize the theme from Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, but it's been Elgarized by Miklos Rocha, moved to a major key and played like a regal march. The coach passes through a stone archway, and we go in close to see the gilded letters flash on its side as it passes a flaming link. V.R."
I love that.
Isn't that grand?
That is fantastic. And finally, we learn that the comedy Holmes and Watson, being shot right now in England with Will Ferrell in the title role, along with John C. Reilly, is going to be released on August 3rd, 2018. So you've been forewarned. If you would like to get off the planet before then, you have about 1.5 years to put your plans into action.
Oh, no, wait a minute. So the summer of 2018 has become August 23rd?
August 3rd.
August 3rd.
2018, yes.
August 3rd. Sounds to me like they don't have high hopes for this.
No, it is not the July 4th traditional or Memorial Day blockbuster weekend. Well, here's hoping that it is no Ballad of Ricky Bobby.
Well, it's directed and written. It's by Ethan Coen.
Ethan Coen, yeah.
The leading director here, and I think very highly of the films he and his brother have made. So I'll certainly give it the benefit of the doubt.
Well, we'll see. There we go. We're ready for some gas. Turn up the gas, Watson. Well, seeing as we talked about escaping and escapism during this episode, I thought it might be a fine time to go with an alternative gas lamp, a poem, something we've read on the show here before or had read for us previously. And that is A Long Evening with Holmes by Bill Schweikert. When the world rushes in with worries and cares, and my problems and headaches are coming in pairs, I just climb in my mind up those 17 stairs and spend a long evening with Holmes. The good doctor greets me and motions me in. Holmes grasps my hand and lays down his violin. Then we sit by the fire and sip a tall gin when I spend a long evening with Holmes. And while we're discussing his cases galore, if I'm lucky, there comes a loud knock at the door. In stumbles a client, head spattered with gore, when I spend a long evening with Holmes. Watson binds up the client's poor face, while Holmes soon extracts all the facts of the case. Then off in a hansom to Brixton we race, when I spend a long evening with Holmes. The adventure is solved. Holmes makes it all right. Then back to the lodgings by dawn's early light, and a breakfast by Hudson to wind up the night, when I spend a long evening with Holmes. So this modern rat race can't keep me in a cage. I have a passport to a far better age, as close as the bookshelf, as near as a page. I can spend a long evening with Holmes.
Very nice. Very appropriate given the subject.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah. Nice reading.
Thank you. Well, we did have, we had a comment come in from, a listener, Dennis Henley, who, was listening to, I think it was, episode 112, when we mentioned, I think that's when we were talking about our time in New York and the discovery of the, Cambridge University Press, Sherlock Holmes guide. And he did a little bit of searching on, what did you call it? The steam-driven internet? Amazing. He found a link at the Book Depository, the Cambridge Companion to Sherlock Holmes, paperback, edited by Janice M. Allen and Christopher Pittard. It is due out from the Cambridge University Press, looks like May 26, 2017. So that is much sooner than we had initially thought. I think we had mentioned mid-2018.
Yeah. Well, no doubt because of the publicity and mention we gave to the book, they've advanced the date.
Clearly. I love that, that knee-jerk response. Could be a lot worse. Well, if you, like Dennis, would like to reach out to us, we would certainly be willing to receive whatever you have to say. And you can say that in a variety of ways. You can put your fingers to keyboard or to flat glass and simply type out an email to us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. You can go to the show notes of this show, which is ihose.co/ihose114. You can leave a comment for us on Twitter or on Facebook or anywhere that you keep your social media.
Yeah, and please call us. We're so lonely. Call 774-221-READ. It's 774-221-7323. There, you'll be able to natter away and leave us a comment, which we will be thrilled and delighted to play on the show. And in fact, if you leave us 45 minutes, 46 minutes of comments, that will solve our co-host problem.
There we go. That's a show right there.
Yeah,
I love it. And do please remember to check us out on iTunes or Google Play or wherever you get your audio content. Simply go on over to SherlockHolmesPodcast.com and check out our show Trifles, where we, as I mentioned before, talk about some of the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories for 15 minutes at a time. It's a lot more palatable than this show, I'll tell you that. What are you going to do? Well, until next time, I remain ever palatable and lovable, Scott Monty.
And I am cast off Burt Wolder.
The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
project, but I am not scared. I've got lots and lots of time. I am calm and prepared. I'll start nice and early. I'll steadily climb onward step by step by step and do it a bit at a time. I'll start off tomorrow or maybe the following day or the day after that. No, wait, that's a Sunday, but definitely Monday as soon as I've finished deworming the cat. I'll just clear my inbox and pair up my gym socks and start by the end of the week. Once I've done all the cleaning and painted the ceiling and taught myself Russian, Swahili and Greek. But I resent the implication this is mere procrastination. It's essential preparation, well worth getting right. I am not procrastinating, I am simply wisely waiting in case the magic pixies come and do it in the night. It's time to begin it, but hang on a minute, the deadline's still 1 week away. I'll just do some filing and grant all the tiling. How did that happen? I've just got one day. I'll start bang on 7 or 9 or 11 or lunch or at least before bed. Oh, fine, well, all right, then I'll stay up all night, do it all in 10 hours while I'm off my head. But I resent the implication it was mere procrastination. The project underwent gestation, sitting on the shelf. I was not procrastinating, I was simply wisely waiting in case the project came to life and somehow did itself.
That's perfect. That is great.
Isn't that wonderful? I wish I knew the name of the performer who's singing that. It's there's a wonderful sketch comic artist in Britain, John Finnemore, and this is from at least a year ago. He has a has had in the past short run series on the BBC, and this is from John Finnemore's sketch program on the BBC probably a year ago, which I just loved it and clipped it and saved it. And all of a sudden we're talking about procrastinating.
There you go. Well, years ago when I was a resident assistant in the dorms, you know, we back in those days before the internet, we had to hang up, announcements, campus announcements and student club announcements and whatnot on a bulletin board. You know, you just staple up an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with whatever information is on it. And you distributed these in your mailbox every week. Well, I created one of my own and slipped it in all of my fellow RAs' mailboxes for the first meeting of the Procrastination Society of Boston University. And the meeting date was given as the day after tomorrow. Kept that up all year.
Oh, that's good. I like that.